I decided to do this video on Sarpa Yoga because we're getting ready to go into a fairly intense time in regards to the experience of Sarpa Yoga by transit. And you may know by taking classes with me or listening to other talks that I typically don't get much into broad transits for the masses. So for example, when you see people saying, you can expect this to occur over the next month because of these planetary positions, and it's supposed to be indicated for the general public, I'm not necessarily seeing that work out too well. And that's because there are patterns within the birth chart, and those patterns are our karma. And then when transits occur real time in the sky and they form similar patterns, they can trigger those karmic predispositions. But if you don't have a karmic predisposition indicated by your birth chart, it doesn't matter if the planets by transit are saying something's going to happen, it's not going to influence you. So it has to be in your birth chart first, and then if we see it in transit, that's a good time to make a prediction that something might occur. Now, the reason I'm focusing on this, though, is because during this particular Sarpa period that's coming up July 30th, 2013, both the rulers of the nodes of the moon, both the rulers of Rahu and Ketu, are going to be debilitated. So Venus is going to be debilitated in Virgo, and Mars is going to be debilitated in Cancer. And at the moment, Venus is ruling over Ketu in Taurus, and Mars is ruling over Rahu in Scorpio. And this may not be something that you need to worry about very much, but it is something that's helpful to be aware of, because there are a lot of people in the world who have a sensitivity to Rahu and Ketu based on the position in the chart. And people who have a sensitivity to Rahu and Ketu specifically are typically prone to Sarpa Yoga time, which is what I call it, Sarpa time, and also eclipses. So even if you don't feel what I'm going to describe, chances are someone you know might, and that might help you to understand exactly what's going on with them, and that it's nothing personal, and that if you wait it out, things definitely will improve. So first of all, let's consider what Sarpa Yoga is. Well, Sarpa Yoga is when all of the planets are on one side of Rahu and Ketu. And so if we're looking at the chart here, we see we've got Ketu at 12 degrees of Taurus, and we have the moon at 19 degrees of Taurus. So the moon is on this side of Ketu. And then we have Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus. And we come around here, and even though these are flipped, when we look at the degrees, we see that really Rahu should be over here and Saturn should be down here. And so that's indicating that Saturn is also on this part of the zodiac, this side of the zodiac, with Rahu causing the boundary line, which creates the Sarpa Yoga. Now, what does this mean? Well, Sarpa Yoga is supposed to translate into dark time serpent. And there are two types of Sarpa Yoga. There's the Anuloma Sarpa Yoga, and there is the Viloma Sarpa Yoga. The Anuloma Sarpa Yoga is where all of the planets are moving towards Rahu. And what we'll see here is that in this particular chart, Rahu is creating the boundary here, and all the planets move in this direction through the chart. So this is an Anuloma Sarpa Yoga. And again, this is a particularly negative Sarpa Yoga because the nodes of the moon always act like the planets that rule them. And what we have here is Ketu ruled by Venus, which is in Virgo. So this Ketu is going to act like a debilitated Venus. And we have Rahu down here in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. Mars is debilitated in Cancer. So therefore we have both nodes of the moon acting like debilitated planets. And this creates more potential for crisis, problems, feeling of insecurity, feelings of confusion, of self-doubt, and there can be difficulty communicating or difficulty understanding the motivations of others, which can cause a lot of interpersonal dynamic problems. Now again, we don't want to make these broad, generalized, sweeping statements saying that they're going to apply to everyone. However, what we can see is what are the predominant influence that Ketu gives in Taurus and that Saturn gives, excuse me, not Saturn, that Rahu gives in Scorpio. And if we can see what those influences are, and we can see what the potential is, then we can think back on our own lives and think, have we had these experiences before? Is this something that I relate to? And if these negative experiences are something that you relate to, then you don't have to have an astrologer tell you that this time period might bring these things up for you, because you already know you have that kind of pattern, or you have that kind of predisposition, karmic predisposition within your chart. So let's consider K2 in Taurus. When K2 is in Taurus, this brings up issues around one's security, being secure in the material world. It brings up issues about being able to provide for oneself, practically speaking. So this can have issues around money, providing for oneself, and meeting one's own financial security. What this can indicate is during this Sarpa Yoga time period, there may be obstructions or difficulties within one's work or career in regards to getting paid or having enough money to meet their responsibilities and take care of those things that are important to them in their life. So it can be particularly challenging around the idea of material resources. There can be lots of sudden ups and downs and inconsistency in one's material resources during this time. Now, the next thing we need to look at is Rahu's influence in Scorpio. Now, we know that Scorpio deals with psychological transformation. Scorpio is also a sign that deals with our deeper psychological nature, but more specifically our ability to be content in the world. Because when we have our deeper psychological nature at peace and at rest, we are content and we don't have the compulsion that Rahu brings to it. But now we have Rahu acting like this debilitated Mars, which can create a period of feeling very willful, that you have to try harder than you need to, or a person might end up getting in altercations with others, where there's a strong test of one's will, or the sense of competition comes into play here. So relating to others might have some difficulty in regards to the competitive side of things. Rahu represents addictions. Scorpio, being the 8th house, can show our inner psychological weaknesses. This can indicate a time period where if we have psychological addictions, or we have any kind of addiction at all, that they can be stimulated. So you might be more inclined to start smoking or drink more or shop more, or whatever addictions you might have. Rahu can really stimulate this. And why would this be the case? Because we have all this tension, all this insecurity from our material resources. So we try to find fulfillment through our addictive nature to bring peace to our inner psychology. So again, if you yourself have this capacity, it may be something that you experience. If you or a loved one or a friend or someone you work with has this capacity, it might come out in them as well. And again, it's happening because there is a transit going on triggering a certain pattern within them. And once this Sarpa time period passes, that will also start to lessen, and hopefully things will get back to normal, as long as there's no sudden breaks or changes that just end up destroying one's inner capacity to be happy or psychological contentment. So Rahu is acting like a debilitated Mars, and when Rahu is debilitated, it causes great feelings of being overwhelmed, being easily disappointed, and it can be about anything. It can create a state of mind where the person is just a little too sensitive to the things that go on in life. The littlest things can make a person unhappy or make them feel that they are a failure. So if you have this pattern, if you have this tendency, it may be something that comes up with you at this time. K2 acting like a debilitated Venus. When K2 is debilitated, it gives half-hearted attempts to find security within the world, where the person is frustrated and they don't see really any point to try because they don't think it's going to work out. Essentially, we have to remember the nodes of the moon are planets that cause eclipses. And so they eclipse our inner light, our inner sense of seeing the bigger picture and understanding what's going on in the world around us. So it creates a lot of struggle, trying to overcome this debilitated feeling that you can't make any progress within the world. K2 acting like a debilitated Venus. Venus is the planet of tact and diplomacy. And since K2 is not working well, it can show that our attempts at tact and diplomacy fail, or things that worked in the past where we could really communicate well with others or reach others in a diplomatic way. It just doesn't seem to matter. Whatever you say, whatever you do, it just doesn't really work out. Again, it's because there's this static interference of the Sarpa Yoga occurring at the moment. Now Rahu is with Saturn. And Saturn is that planet of, again, security and stability. And so this is all tying together. We're seeing a lot of confluence here. It can show that during this particular Sarpa Yoga time period, even because of these other reasons, that we have this sense that our security and our stability is off, that we can't quite get a handle on things, or that things are getting out of control. And this is particularly in regards to financial, material areas of life, and also psychological and addictive tendencies, and our deeper inner psychological contentment. Those are where the troubles come into play. Now, as we mentioned, Rahu is acting like this debilitated Mars here in Cancer because he's in Scorpio. And anytime we get a Rahu-Mars connection anyway, there's this problem utilizing our will and our power in a healthy way, which can create a lot of explosive power struggles within our life, with our loved ones, with those people that we depend on. So if you're feeling more anger, more frustration, more like your will is being thwarted or challenged, well, that's just par for the time. That's what's going on, which is caused by the Sarpa Yoga. And so the key is more detachment, more self-awareness, so that you can pull back and realize when is it appropriate to use willpower, when is it appropriate to get involved in power struggles, and when is it appropriate to just let it go. Now, during the Sarpa Yoga, there will be less ability to perceive correctly, but for people who meditate more, who have that innate sense of detachment, that can see their personality, knowing that it's not them, and interact in the world from that particular frame of reference, they'll be less inclined to get involved in a lot of these difficulties indicated by this Sarpa Yoga that's going on, beginning July 30th, 2013. Now, Rahu and Mars, it's important to remember that we've already talked about how having this occur in Scorpio can bring up addictive tendencies. Well, when Rahu and Mars get together, it can create a kind of mentality that you have to have something at any cost in order to be happy. And that can cause a lot of problems within a person's life. So if during this time, again, July 30th, there's this sense of compulsion that you have to have something in particular in order to feel psychologically content and at peace, or that a certain situation must go your way, keep in mind it might be the Sarpa Yoga that's clouding your judgment, clouding your awareness. And wait until after the Sarpa Yoga passes before you make any big decisions. Now let's take a look at when this Sarpa Yoga is going to be over. So we'll look at some transits here. So transits, let's move it on up to today. Okay, and just so we know what we're looking at here, within this chart, this inner wheel is the birth chart or the natal chart for July 30th, 2013. This outer wheel are the actual transits that are going on around that chart. So what we really want to focus on is this outer wheel, because we're not really looking at a birth chart. I just set that date so we could see when the Sarpa Yoga started. And so for now, we have Rahu here and Ketu here, and all of the planets on this part of this chart, this side of the chart. So let's go ahead and see how long it takes for some planet to break out of this cycle. And this here represents the Lagna or the ascendant, so it's not a planet, it doesn't count. So what we get is on August 13th, so the day before this particular date, the moon hits Rahu and breaks out of the cycle. So during this time, we are no longer in Sarpa. Let's see if we go into another Sarpa time period. And even if we do go into another Sarpa time period, it does get a little bit better, because as we can see, Venus has now moved into Libra. So it's no longer debilitated in Virgo, which means that Ketu is no longer acting like a debilitated Venus. So here we are in another Sarpa time period. That would have begun August 26, 2013. However, again, we see that Venus has moved into Libra. And now we also see that Mars is moving out of Cancer. So it's no longer going to be debilitated. It's going to be in Leo, which means that it's not as intense as that previous Sarpa Yoga time period that we saw. So let's see if there are any more happening. So once again, the moon breaks out on September 10th, ending that Sarpa Yoga time period. And by the time the moon gets back to Ketu here, we already have Venus moving past Rahu. So no more Sarpa Yoga time periods this year. And there won't be any again for a while, because after that we see that Saturn is also passing by Rahu. So it's breaking up that pattern that we have. Okay, so I've just reset this back to the beginning of the most important Sarpa Yoga time period to pay attention to. And that begins July 30th. And this time period will run for about 2 weeks, if I'm correct. So we'll just see how that goes. So the moon's coming up on Rahu, and it is August 13th when that time period ends. So July 30th through August 13th, that's the Sarpa time period we want to be aware of.